people of CONvergence, the moment that you have been waiting for. Put your various appendages and your friends together for Monster Science. They Might Be Halflings by Reverend Matt.
Well, that's our show, everybody. Thanks very much. Yeah. Hi. I'm Reverend Matt, and one of the great joys of tabletop role-playing games is the opportunity to play the role of somebody who might be a little more interesting than you. Now, I mean no offense by this. I'm sure you are very interesting, or at least half of you are, but... And many of you are dressed and attired to prove it, but are you in fact a paladin, a barbarian, a wizard? No, you're not. And yes, I know some of you have a magical practice, and I do respect that. I even spelled it with a K here in my script. But if you are telling me you're a full-scale wizard, then you need to cast Otto's Irresistible Dance on me right now. See? I resisted. So that's not Otto's Irresistible Dance, and I win. And another thing that you are not, and that I am not, and I spend every single day feeling badly about it, is a non-human entity. So, tonight we are going to talk about the long and bizarre history of playing non-humans in role-playing games. We will begin, of course, at the beginning, with 1974's First edition Dungeons and Dragons, which is not advanced. There we go. Rules for fantastic medieval war games, campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures. It's still called that. Price, $10. And if you find an original one of these available for purchase online, still $10. In these rules, you could play as a human or as a dwarf, an elf, or a halfling. And doesn't that sound fun? Stepping not only out of the dreary modern world, but into an entirely new species, taking the outsider's viewpoint to the point of not even being a human? Yes, that sounds delightful. Thank you. Well, screw you, Jackson, because we've decided to make it an option and also to punish you for taking that option. If you were a dwarf or a halfling, you see, you could only pick the fighter class, and moreover, you could only reach 6th level in that class, or 4th if you were a halfling. After that, if you were a fully sentient, civilized being, but not an actual human, you simply could not learn how to fight any better, or indeed learn anything at all. Dwarves at last made up for this with, quote, "They are the only characters able to fully employ the +3 magic warhammer," and yes, I would give up all chance of personal growth for that. Elves, by the way, were all fighter/magic users, but they were limited to 4th and 8th level in these classes. So, suck it, elves, in your face. At first, it was really difficult to see what the point of this limitation was, but there does appear to have been some level of back and forth on the whole question of non-human player characters right from the beginning. In the original white box, the description of the non-human races is followed immediately by a paragraph that reads, "There is no reason that players cannot be allowed to play as virtually anything, provided they begin relatively weak and work up to the top, i.e. a player wishing to be a dragon would have to begin as, let us say, a young one, and progress upwards in the usual manner, steps being predetermined by the campaign referee." Cool, fun, but then came Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced, D&D for achievers, the kind of Dungeons and Dragons that dwarves will never be able to play. And its Dungeon Master's Guide, and its essay by D&D co-creator Gary Gygax on page 21 of that guide. Under a handsome banner illustration of a green dragon slaughtering some kobolds for what I'm sure is a very good reason. we see the heading, The Monster as Player Character, and we are then treated to, as you can see, a truly inspiring word count, a veritable epic poem on why you can't play as monsters and why you are garbage for asking. It obviously fairly redefines TLDR, but allow me to share some highlights. There's a sort of little opening paragraph, and then we get, advanced D&D is unquestionably humanocentric, with demi-humans, semi-humans, and humanoids in various orbits around the sun of humanity. It goes on that humans are the most important because they do not have level restrictions. We're going to circle back around to that. Next up is a few paragraphs about how humanity must be central because humans are what we, the players, are most familiar with. Again, to quote, "To adventure among the weird is fantasy enough without becoming that too." And speaking of inspirations in fiction, those works which do not feature mankind in a central role are uncommon. Those which do not deal with men at all are scarce indeed. Then, in Act 3, we get, quote, "The environment for adventuring will be built around humans and demi-humans for the most part. Similarly, the majority of participants in the campaign will be human. And, talking of non-human characters, the considered opinion of this writer is that such characters are not beneficial to the game and should be excluded. Note that exclusion is best handled by restriction and not by refusal. Enumeration of the limits and drawbacks which are attendant upon the monster character will always be sufficient to steer the intelligent player away from the monster approach, for in most cases it was only thought of as a likely manner of game domination." Prolonged heavy sigh. That's me, that's not what he wrote. And then, the less intelligent players who demand to play monster characters regardless of obvious consequences will soon remove themselves from play in any event. And oh, you haven't played this much, have you? Anyway, TLDR of the TLDR, don't imagine weird stuff. Stop it, stop it. Humans are normal, and we've designed this fantasy game to enforce the power of that normalcy. It's no fun to play non-humans because it is disadvantageous, and it is disadvantageous because we made it that way. There may be a strong argument for the enforcing of playing humans in fantasy worlds, but A, no there isn't, I can't hear you, and B, this essay is not it. And so a huge new hobby was defined in a significant part by what I can only assume are Gary Gygax's psychological problems. Another thing about Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is that it about doubled the number of types of non-human you could play, adding to elves, dwarves, and halflings, half-elves, and half-orcs, and gnomes. Now, of course, you recognize all of these, the gnomes from these, because you always wanted to be one of these, and now's your chance. And the other two, from the same place, you recognize the halflings, and that, of course, is Lord of the Rings, which I understand some of you are a fan of. That's great. The elves and dwarves are plainly from there as well, but an argument could be made that they came here from general fairy tales and folklore and such, but Tolkien fully invented the words half-elf and half-orc. It is therefore somewhat remarkable that in the March 1985 issue of Dragon magazine, Gygax himself wrote an essay on how Dungeons & Dragons had not been really influenced by Middle-earth very much at all. He found the books boring, he claimed, and told us that Gandalf and Sauron were lame, and he wished there'd been more Tom Bombadil. Pictured here. More to the point, he admitted that he'd been inspired by the Ents to make the copyright distinct treants, and similarly the hobbits and halflings, and noted that orc is an Old English variant of the word ogre, and that is true, and that therefore he had not been inspired to include orcs by Tolkien, which of course is not true. He makes no mention of the game's intelligent giant eagles, good guy werebears, rock-throwing stone giants, its wargs, or its huge winged demons called Balors with a sword in one hand and a whip in the other. He mentions that he got the names of gray elves and wood elves from Tolkien, but notes that his are not Middle-earth elves because his are, wait for it, short. Checkmate. He also claimed that the game had been more influenced by old-school high fantasy swords and sorcery stuff, Conan and such like, and there are some monsters in the monster manual that do go in this direction, and it also explains the gnomes. Later in 1985, Gygax published another essay entitled, "Let's Start Pushing the Pendulum the Other Way." In this, he bemoaned the increased tendency towards emphasizing role-playing in RPGs, calling it amateur theatrics, pointing out that role-playing was merely a modifier to the core concept of game, and complained of, quote, stilted attempts to act the part of some character, unquote. Basically, let's stop paying attention to characters and imagination and get back to rolling to save versus wands. Again, you are imagining wrong. Gary Gygax is to a large degree responsible for the creation of role-playing games, and I love role-playing games, and they are ultimately responsible for a commanding percentage of my social life and performing career. Mr. Gygax, you created a glorious thing, and it also seems like you were maybe a tool sometimes. Of course, all of these advanced Dungeons & Dragons races could only advance to certain levels in their classes, just like before, though now they could advance a level or two higher if they had especially high attributes pertaining to their character class. And do you know what that is? Advanced. Oh, I also need to tell those of you who are a good deal younger than me, well, first, you disgust me, and second, in these old games, your heritage also determined what class you could be, what jobs you could have. Oh, you're a halfling and you want to be a magic user? Get the hell out of my office. Is the muscle gnome still up there? Good. Now, all of this was arbitrary, designed to keep humans, and hence the familiar and normal, central. It has been argued that maybe this was for character balance, which is to say, to make all of the characters of similar power levels. Of course, it doesn't make any sense that these restrictions would be for character balance, because this would be meaningless at lower levels where everyone was of the same level. But the first edition did make the weird mistake of having character balance be aggregate over the course of the game. A first-level fighter would have armor and a sword, and a first-level magic user could cast a spell that was the equivalent of firing one arrow and then be killed if he ate a bad potato and got a stomach ache from it. Whereas a 20th level fighter was maybe 3 times as good as hitting people with his sword, whereas a 20th level magic user could turn everyone on their plane of existence into a grilled cheese sandwich, pictured here, with one of their spell slots. Didn't make any sense. And also, in any case, multi-species play balance was not a serious concern anyway. The non-humans could do some things that humans could not. They'd be able to see in the dark, or some of them could detect sliding construction. We were very into detecting sliding construction in the 1980s. It was a hell of a time. But no powers worthy of the punishment that they received. This conservatism was redressed somewhat in the pages of Dragon magazine, also put out by TSR, the publishers of D&D at the time. Dragon would often feature new rules for the game, and published a number of new character classes, fully fleshed out in every way, but they told you only for use, for NPCs, for non-player characters. Player characters could not play these classes. Less common, but still present, were new fleshed-out character races. The first of these they ever did was the half-ogre. Very strong and very dumb, and when you consider that ogres are heavily built and fully 8 feet tall, very inadvisable to think about the conception of. One fun article proposed that satyrs and dryads were the male and female of the same species and gave us half satyrs and half dryads to play. Half aquatic elves were also detailed, as were character stats for monster manuals, aquatic elves to play, because as long as it has the word elf in its name, you can play it. Why there were aquatic elves in the first place, I cannot say I understand. But the first edition also had aquatic hobgoblins, aquatic ghouls, and here comes the aquatic beholder, which I cannot say I understand. Dragon magazine had a new sort of Arctic dwarf gnome kind of people called the Uldra, named after a Scandinavian fairy creature, which I liked very much. And there was an article detailing the playing of orcs, goblins, kobolds, and svarts. Check's notes. I wrote Check's notes in here, yes, yes. Svarts. But probably the two most dramatic ones were an article about player character centaurs and one about Aarakocra, which had their wings on their arms in those days. And though speaking generally, I am perfectly happy about bird people having separate wings and arms, it is a bedrock of my faith that Aarakocra have their wings on their arms. Some lunatic in the Fiend Folio said it, I believe it, that settles it. But that was about it. Just a handful, none of them official, and most of them severely handicapped. The orcs and goblins and such had terrible attributes and didn't start with any equipment. And the Aarakocra panicked when indoors or underground, which was something of a liability in a game that was, by character limit, 50% about dungeons, as well as 44% about dragons, and 6% about and. But a good deal of correction of this course was made in 1989's Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. Not at first. No, at first you could just be the same races as before, with the same restrictions as before, but more interesting options would come to be available. At first, these came about in the pages of 2nd edition's various weird settings. One was its Dark Sun setting, where the world was a desert, and halflings were hardcore, and everything was grim and gritty. The 90s were bearing down hard upon us, my friends. The good news was that in this setting, you could play as Thrycreen, mantis warriors that had appeared in 1st edition's Monster Manual 2, where they had sweet weaponry and 8 elves. And Dark Sun Thrycreen got a whole book just about them. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the finest piece of literature ever created by human agency. I am going to say that it is the 3rd. Then, of course, there was Spelljammer, where it was a straight D&D world with mind flayers and blink dogs and such, only it was in outer space with wooden ships because magic, and it was so awesome and so dumb and so awesome again. In the basic Spelljammer boxed set, you could now play lizard folk, or lizard men as they were called at the time, and the reason you could play them was that space lizard men were more civilized than regular lizard men, you see. Sure, yeah, I thought so. Also, implicitly, you couldn't play regular lizard men before because they weren't civilized enough, because all of the humans and half-orcs you were playing were Noel Coward-esque urbane sophisticates. Later Spelljammer products would introduce many more playable races. There were a couple of different varieties of ape people and insect people, great, but there were 2 really important species. And by important, we mean I like them. One was the Gif, who were great big hippo people, whose culture was sort of that of the Victorian and pre-Victorian British Navy. Wonderful. Brilliant. I have absolutely no idea what is happening, and I love that. They started off as entities to encounter, but later you could play them because who wouldn't want to? A man can spend his entire life yearning to play Admiral Nelson as a great big hippo and never even realize it until the opportunity at last arises. And the other, less random but no less original, is the Drakon, kind of like a centaur, except with a dragon head and a small sauropod instead of a horse body. And if in my lifetime our society achieves transhumanism, the ability to design and exchange whole biological bodies for ourselves, this is exactly what I will look like. I would wear a different shirt. But these niche, it is a good shirt, I grant you. Sometimes I would wear a different shirt. But these niche species were soon joined by the complete book of humanoids, which was nothing more or less than a book of how to make player characters out of virtually everything in the game that had 2 hands and wasn't too big. Orcs and kobolds and all of them were in, of course. Centaurs were official now, as were Weemix, lion centaurs that had appeared in the previous edition's Monster Manual 2 as having a whole lion for a lower body, and for an upper body, David Lee Roth. Fremlins were in. I don't know what a Fremlin is, and I'm not looking it up because I don't care and you can't make me. And many others besides. This then set the tone for future editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Anything, or at least a lot of things, would go from here on out. Indeed, the Dragonkin, or Dragonborn, or Dragon something were brought in as a core species to the basic player's handbook, in spite of not having a human face at all. Unless they got it from someone and maybe kept it in a bag or something. I'm not here to judge your kinks. Well, no, I'm not. And along with this out went the level limits and the limited choices of classes and so on. And Gary Gygax doubtless clutched his pearls and collapsed gently to the ground. And now, there are certainly more playable species than ever, partially because the people who run D&D are going ahead and publishing them, and partly because of the nightmare of total domination disguised as open-hearted hand-holding that is called, among other things, the Open Gaming License. This is, of course, the permission given to other publishers to publish gaming books using the D&D rule system, which seems awfully nice, and which, of course, is meant to turn everything into D&D. Everything. Other role-playing games, the military-industrial complex, agape, the concept of unconditional love, everything. Still, revolutionary though I'm being about this, my absolute favorite 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons faces are from one of these open gaming license books, but I'm going to save them for the end, delaying gratification, and therefore making your role-playing creature lecture more intensely pleasurable. I will, however, tell you right now about my least favorite 5e lineage, and that would be the Kenku. For those of you who have somebody knew it, I would like you to approach me after the show. For those of you who have somehow made it this far in life without knowing what a Kenku is, well, I'm baffled by that, but a Kenku is basically a flightless crow person that is incapable of having a creative thought, and indeed are only able to speak by repeating things other people have said. And some people really enjoy this as a role-playing challenge, and more power to them. But frankly, it seems exhausting to me, and beyond that, a complete lack of creativity is not something that I want to celebrate. And I also wonder if it's even possible. Did you know that every single word I have said to you in this whole talk is a word that I did not make up? Even Kenku. And so we're all just repeating other people's words. Where is the line here? I don't understand the neurochemistry of the Kenku, and I will die mad about it. But this is not why I hate the Kenku. The hatred is much more recent, and it is for the reasons I've just enumerated, but informed by new real-world circumstances. Simply put, Kenku are a species of chat GPTs, and they can go to hell. Thank you. But let's turn this positive again, shall we? It is really terrific that we have such a bounty of options in D&D, the one-world government of role-playing games now. It's terrific because it allows for broader imaginative possibilities. It's terrific because kobolds are cool, and it's terrific because the outsiders are being invited in. In many realms of popular culture, we have seen an increased tendency to sympathy for monsters, stories told from their entirely reasonable points of view, and this is genuinely great. All monsters are definitively outsiders, and the more we extend our hands to them, the more we are on their sides, the better we are as a people, symbolically anyway. I have spoken of this in grand terms here, but it also has a metaphorical aspect in real-world politics. Tolkien, writing in England, put his virtuous people in the north and west of his world, and the evil people in the south and east, including the bulk of the orcs. When you read the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's description of the language of the orcs, vulgar and debased, a symbolism tends to shine through. Not even getting to the blonde, fair elves being representations of perfection, and then there's also the genetic right of kings, and so on. And then later, in role-playing games, there are whole humanoid communities that you look up in the monster manual, and it says evil. So it's time to kill them, as many of them as you can, because you don't like that they're there. Sure, yes, they're evil, but that's what every actual genocide says, and it's not really a good look. Does evil exist? Sure seems to, but containing it genetically is reminiscent of some very bad real ideas. So much the better, then, that modern role-playing is moving away from it. I mean, look at the orcs. None of the other sections of this talk are... Actually, that is a thing that I should have edited out. It's like you're participating in the show. The orcs are an entirely debased and evil culture, people whom you not only may, but should kill. According to the Monster Science Institute's current research, the first instance of sympathy for the orcs came in the 1980 Rankin-Bass animated version of Return of the King. It's not for everybody, though it has its defenders. It is the massive text of this book crammed into 98 minutes, and so huge amounts of stuff are left out, and what is left makes no friggin' sense whatsoever. Still, it has some great designs. Its Fell Beast is a big favorite of mine, and it also has the original song, Where There's a Whip, There's a Way. It's just pandering of me to bring it up, I know. It is sung by marching orcs, and it slaps harder than any song ever used in the entire fantasy genre. Even Let It Go. Even the Never-Ending Story song. Too soon. And the first stanza of Where There's a Whip, There's a Way begins with the orcs singing, "We don't want to go to war today." They are not naturally warlike and hateful. They are doing this against their will. And this may be the first time in popular culture that we are looking at things from the point of view of the orc, and that point of view is not kill, 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 go to a restaurant and order something off the menu, because orcs apparently have those, kill, kill, kill. The first official D&D rules for playing orcs appeared in the Orcs of Far, a supplement for regular Dungeons & Dragons, which was published alongside the advanced version until the two merged in 3rd edition. This provided fully original rules to play most of the central canonical evil species, orcs and goblins and gnolls and all of that. Now, the idea here was that you were playing them as brutal and vicious, so we weren't exactly casting aside the concept of evil races, but, small steps. After all, this was not advanced. Nevertheless, the very next year was a very big year for the orcs. The aforementioned Dragon Magazine article came out, and more importantly, so did Shadowrun, a game set in 2050 that merged cyberpunk, which is what we had before steampunk. Yes, Reverend Matt, let's get you to bed. Merged cyberpunk with fantasy tropes, dragons and magic and so on. And the 4 core non-human character races, each derived from humanity and considered a subspecies thereof, were elves, dwarves, orcs, and trolls. And this game became very popular, and so the orcs and trolls being front and center was actually a bit of a big deal. Plus also the meta plot, both in the setting history and as it moved forward, dealt extensively with prejudice against the 4 non-human races. Not a level of analysis on the level of, say, Cornel West, seen here in The Matrix Reloaded, due to what I assume was some sort of mistake, but it was a solid attempt. And now, in 2025, we have come to the point where orcs are very nearly normalized. Here's Jamie Lee Curtis as an orc on a red carpet. Here is Legends and Lattes, I knew I was going to regret that. A fantasy romance novel with an orc. Indeed, we could go farther into fantasy genre romance fiction, all the way into erotica with orcs and with many other things, but then I would have to pluck out my own eyes. Orcs are a success story for inclusion, but this isn't always the way it goes. We won't go into gamer bros and the internet in general, but I will mention that a few years ago now, a company called TSR LLC has been trying to publish Star Frontier's New Genesis, a reboot of the old Star Frontier space opera game by the original TSR, with the philosophy, this new one having the philosophy that the problem with the old Star Frontiers was its lack of really overt bigotry. This new version has a Nordic race with minimums of 13 in all statistics, and yes, in fact, a Negro race with a maximum intelligence of 9. transgender characters are specifically forbidden, and the text repeats the phrase, quote, "Some races are superior than others," unquote, which is grammatically quite incorrect, but coming from these people, imagine that. So, great strides have been taken in racial symbolism in role-playing games. We're just not completely done, that's all. Okay, once again, back to the fun stuff. In spite of D&D's massive efforts to the contrary, there are in fact numberless of other tabletop role-playing games. So let's take a look at some of their non-human options. The fantasy genre, happily, got weird pretty quick, notably in Talislanta, where even the baseline human-type characters came in all sorts of colors and were pointy-eared as often as not. Nevertheless, this game put out a series of ads in Dragon magazine with the bold tagline, "No elves," which I didn't understand as a 13-year-old. Elves were great. They could be multi-class fighter magic users, for God's sake. I didn't yet have the hots for Cate Blanchett as Galadriel. That would come later. But the principle was there. Anyway, they did a lot of these because Talislanta wanted you to know that they were punk rock. I mean, they weren't. No tabletop RPGs were punk rock then, or cool in any other way. We were hunted for sport. Sometimes I miss those days. Anyway, in Talislanta, in lieu of elves, you could play, among other things, various animal people. There's one, there's another. Here's number 3, and there's number 4. There's more besides that. This theme, the animal person, would be a popular one in early fantasy RPGs. The Arcanum role-playing game, which is a bit obscure, but I'm telling you, pretty awesome, had a species called the Andaman. Now that's the Arcanum role-playing game. Had a species called the Andaman, where you could select the predatory mammal of your choosing and be a humanoid one of those. No. The Palladium role-playing game was an early adopter of the all basic humanoids are standard system with orcs and ogres and everything as core species, and then it also made up the Wolfen, who were terrifying giant wolfmen with a Roman-style empire that threatened humanity's rule. But it was made very clear that they were not actually evil, at least in no more proportion than humanity is. They were simply a non-human nation, an entirely legitimate one, making their own claim to the world and hence being an enemy to humanity. Even as a kid, I loved this sort of thing. It was a triumph of extending understanding to monsters and outsiders. One of my most memorable high school campaigns was one where I played a Wolfen, who was a priest of evil dragon gods, which sort of annihilates all the virtues of the Wolfen race I've just mentioned. Luckily, this was the only thing I did in all of my teenage years that was at all stupid. Now, extremely predictably, the animal people in fantasy RPGs tend to be wolf people and tiger people and stuff like that. But this is not always the case. We also need to talk about humanoid ducks. Talk to your children about humanoid ducks. The Glorantha fantasy world, using the RuneQuest role-playing game, is pretty standard, with trolls and elves and all that sort of thing, in a Bronze Age sort of setting, and that's fine, of course. And then there are the Druuls, who are humanoid ducks, which aren't working. There we go. Who here are pictured fairly realistically, but they are quite often depicted in a Disney Looney Tunes Howard the Duck sort of style. They are proud and tough warriors, but looked down upon by society in Glorantha. And here in the real world, they are not proud and tough warriors because they are not real. But they are still looked down upon by society, or at least by some gamers, because they are too absurd, too silly. We cannot take them seriously, like we can the elves and the wizards. Nevertheless, they have their followers delighted instead of mortified by their absurdity. I'm one of these, as are, it would appear, the makers of the current iteration of the RPG Dragonbane, who included in their game the Mallard race, which has as its primary game trait a capacity for entering into bouts of savage fury, which is amazing. Also, if you don't love this picture, we can probably still be friends, but you will have to pay me. For a real plurality of playing animal people, though, we must depart the fantasy genre. The possibility of playing a nigh unlimited selection of intelligent animals actually came as early as 1978 in the first edition of the Gamma World game. This was also published by TSR, and indeed there were AD&D crossover rules published right in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Gamma World diverges widely from that game's species conservatism, though, allowing you to play pure strain humans, which, given our discussions of real-world racial metaphors, I would love to maybe call something else. And then also mutant humans and mutant animals. You would determine your mutations by rolling on this table. Maybe you would get wings. Maybe you would get what is referred to as gas generation musk. Or maybe you would get hemophilia. The truly great flourishing of the mutant animal idea would come, of course, in the 1985 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles role-playing game, which none of you have heard of. This was, of course, based on the comic books created by Peter Laird and by Kevin Eastman, who, as you can see here, is my best friend. And it actually came out during the period in which the TMNT had gained popularity as a remarkably dark comic book that had started as a satire of Frank Miller's Daredevil, of all things, but before the cartoon and all that sort of thing was even proposed. This was a period that lasted, as I recall, 17 minutes, but I was in there, and I was an OG, a hipster fan of the TMNT, and indeed, as long as I'm alive, no matter what evidence is presented to the contrary, I will always believe, I will always know in my heart that all of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles wear red masks. In any case, the role-playing game, like Gamma World, suggested some rather profound randomization. It was suggested that you roll dice to determine your upbringing and education, as well as your actual species. And this method, rolling rather than selecting your species, was used by actual players of the game fully 0% of the time. After these fundamental concepts were never, ever, ever rolled, though, it was always time to make a lot of decisions, and a lot of fun decisions. There was a whole system for deciding exactly how your animal had mutated, what human traits such as hands and speech and bipedalism it had taken on, what animal traits such as senses and flight it had retained, and also what psychic powers it had, and sure, okay. This process was generally a blast, and one of its features was that the points you spent on these things were also spent on your size, which meant that being larger was always better, which is true. The larger an organism is, the better it is, especially taller. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started off a wave of other mutant animal RPGs. In 1988's Justifiers, everyone played mutant animals, or engineered ones anyway, in the future and in outer space, and they were owned by corporations who used them as expendable planetary explorers. So, it's an outer space action RPG, and here is the art for the cover of one of its supplements, and it sure is a choice. Atomic Highway and Mutant Year Zero both feature mutant animals in post-apocalyptic settings, harkening back to Gamma World and to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles' own After the Bomb supplements. Anyone? Okay. These are all, of course, about post-nuclear worlds in which radiation has caused all sorts of animals to mutate into intelligent humanoids, and I'm going to stop you right there. Now, in these games that are not set in post-apocalypses, screw you, spell check, post-apocalypses is fine. There are normally a few different ways to become a so-called mutant animal. One of these is normally deliberate experimentation to turn animals into animal people, which is fine, indeed has a pedigree going back to 1896's H.G. Wells' novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau. In fact, in his 2006 State of the Union address, George W. Bush urged the passing of legislation forbidding, quote, creating human-animal hybrids, unquote. And when I heard this, I thought things had just gotten awesome, but it turned out he only said this as part of a list of other medical procedures he wanted banned so as to lump it in with stem cell research to make it sound by association like science gone mad. By the way, are any of you old enough to remember when we all hated and feared George W. Bush? We were such sweet summer children. random mutagens could also make mutant animals in the games. And then, of course, there's radiation, which has been mutating things since the 1950s at least. And yes, radiation does lead to mutation. But even in a clean, best-case scenario, if nuclear fallout just increases the rate of normal mutation, that is the engine of evolution, most mutations are still bad news. Frogs that possess additional limbs, there's a lot of this actually, and so on. It is very unusual for a mutation to happen to be advantageous. Evolution is about attrition as much as it is about adaptation. But of course, mutation is how evolution works. A scaly animal develops proto-feathers, and over millions of years, its descendants mutate these further into actual feathers. A horse mutates stripes, which recent research indicates have the positive function of confusing flies. And flies, get it together, this is not that weird. And of course, every animal mutates into intelligent humanoids just as fast as they can, which explains why, after hundreds of millions of years of macrobiotic life on Earth, every single animal is an intelligent humanoid. Of course, in some games you can't pick your non-human species because there's only one non-human species to play. Bunnies and Burrows is a 1976 role-playing game in which everyone is rabbits, not mutant rabbits, actual rabbits, albeit ones capable of having abstract ideas and talking to one another. This was the first game in the business in which all of the characters were not even humanoid, and indeed it seems to have actually been the first one to have a detailed skill system, as well as a detailed martial arts system. And if a rabbit game having a martial arts system sounds ridiculous, then you have mispronounced incredible. This game is, of course, based on the novel Watership Down, published just 4 years earlier, and I assume most of you know about Watership Down, but if you do, please enter a visionary trance state for a minute or two while I explain it to the others. Watership Down is a novel told entirely from the perspective of rabbits, actual rabbits who have a language and society. And I first became aware of it myself in my 20s when I was with some friends and someone suggested we watch the animated movie of it. I asked what it was, and I was told it was an animated movie about rabbits, and I said I didn't want to watch a damn bunny cartoon. I was an idiot about some things in my 20s. We watched it anyway, and I was blown away because this cartoon about bunnies had a brutal and ruthless bunny Gestapo and a bunny having incapacitating shamanic visions of bunny Armageddon. I read the book much later, and it is heartbreakingly good. I have silently saluted rabbits when I see them ever since. All right, everybody who knew this already, awaken. Other games featuring fully non-human player characters include Epilion, in which everyone is dragons, albeit of the modern, pleasant sort of dragon, where the pictures of them have them reading books and smiling pleasantly, and Pirate Borg, based off of the completely bananas Morkborg system, in which you can play pirates, obviously, but also some of your players can be their actual monkeys and parrots. And once again, yes. Absolutely. There are plenty of other games where nobody is human, although unlike Bunnies and Burrows or Epilion, usually they are pretty human-like. They're tool users who live in towns and so forth. Mice of Legend is a homebrew D&D conversion in which everybody is adventuring mice, a la the Mouse Guard comic book. And me, personally, I despise mice. They're the worst animal. But when looking at the idea of the hero as an underdog in a dangerous world, one could hardly do better. Maybe a game where everyone is tapeworms. We as a society are probably not ready for that. I'm writing that game anyway. Would you like me to move on and hence get rid of this slide? All right, thought I'd ask. There are certainly a number of games in which all of the characters are anthropomorphic animals, games about furries. Ironclaw is the biggest of the furry games in the fantasy milieu, though I myself rather like Urban Jungle, which is a pulp and or noir setting. I personally am not really much into the furry thing, if I'm honest, but I am also opposed these days to being mean to them because they are truly, genuinely not hurting anything. I mean, except the Nazi furries. This was a whole scandal. Yeah, just look it up. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Also has a tabletop role-playing game where everybody is ponies, or perhaps griffins or baby dragons. It's a newer game, though old school in style, with attributes and skills and all the usual stuff, rather than the more conceptual approach that many modern games such as Fate and a lot of the small publisher games have. It is extremely different, nevertheless, from the vast majority of RPGs, in that it is a game about joy, about cheering NPCs up and supporting one another and all that sort of thing. It's My Little Pony, friendship is magic, not My Muscular Warhorse, friendship is worthless. And as such, it is almost incomprehensible to old school gamers, like if you took a bantam rooster and made it Secretary of the Interior. That's not a bantam rooster. And if you can't imagine someone taking a bantam rooster and making it the Secretary of the Interior, well, it'll happen in a year or two, I'm sure. I'm actually running a game of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, and you should all be very jealous. Thank you. Tabletop RPGs evolved from wargaming, after all, and the shadow is still cast. My Little Pony is put out by the company that also puts out the G.I. Joe, Power Rangers, and Transformers RPGs. The latter one being another game where nobody is human. And instead, everybody plays huge, giant space robots that turn into vehicles to hide among humanity, which they do for like 5 seconds before turning back into robots openly. I make gentle sport, but this game does allow you to design new Dinobots, and that is provably the best. And these 4 games, My Little Pony, G.I. Joe, Power Rangers, and Transformers, all have variations on the same combat system, which means that fights in My Little Pony are intricate and time-consuming. Because that is what the My Little Pony fans wanted most. Once I was in a gaming group that played a Hellboy game for several years, set in the modern world, and with real-world consequences for player character acts of violence and mayhem. Then we switched to first edition AD&D, and in the first adventure, we killed some bandits. And after all the modern world stuff, when we started looting the bodies, someone asked if we were allowed to do this, whether this was legal. Whereupon it was pointed out that if you can't take stuff from the people you kill, then the entire Dungeons & Dragons economy breaks down. Oh, good Lord, I haven't even mentioned the horror RPG boom of the 1990s. This was, of course, kicked off by Vampire the Masquerade, a game in which everybody was vampires. So, a game where everyone was evil. Yes, a game of villains, those are fun, but no, certainly no. These were sad, tortured, brooding vampires. One of your actual statistics was your humanity, which you had to maintain. It ranged from 1 to 10, and it had a hierarchy of sins which listed the sort of moral and ethical lapses you would have to commit to risk losing the point of humanity that you had at each level. If you were fully level 10 in humanity, you would risk losing a point if you found a corner on the sidewalk and didn't turn it into the police. Whereas if you were at level 1, you would maybe lose that if you committed genocide with your bare hands. Maybe a brooding game about humanity sounds kind of dull, but it was all incredibly popular, as had been the Anne Rice novels that plainly gave it its thematic inspiration. And to be fair, I played quite a good deal of it, and honestly, I never experienced it as being that heavy on the brooding. Instead, we all just schemed against other vampires and had fights and all the usual sorts of deeply antisocial things that real gamers like to pretend to do. After Vampire the Masquerade, from the same publisher, came Werewolf the Apocalypse, a game best summarized by this illustration from one of its books. Mage the Ascension, an extremely high-concept game about the nature of reality that had a magic system only marginally less difficult to figure out than it is to become an actual sorcerer in the real world. Wraith the Oblivion, predicated on the notion that that thing where you were putatively sad vampires had not been goth enough. And Changeling the Dreaming, where everybody was fairies in human form, waging war against banality, whatever that was. All of these games were heavily influenced by various works of fiction and other entertainments, of course. Indeed, all RPGs are, except for Dungeons & Dragons, not having been influenced by Tolkien. But the dreaming in Changeling the Dreaming was plainly a reference to the Sandman comics, wildly popular at the time, and having not a lot to do with fairies usually. And the game's first edition, the Changeling the Dreaming's first edition, heavily utilized a dedicated set of cards, because this was just after the great initial flourishing of Magic the Gathering. And if there was one thing that nerd entertainment companies knew that we wanted, it was images printed on small rectangles of cardboard. Though it was this series of games that led to the craze for the horror monster thing in gaming, with many knockoffs afterwards, it actually did not invent the idea. Just a few months before, Nightlife had come out, in which you could play as all sorts of classic horror monsters. And look at that cover. Just look at it. There's this whole muscular and awkwardly sexualized tableau. In the background, there's a werewolf coming out of a subway, and it looks gigantic to the point of hilarious. And it's not actually a bad cover for this particular book. It's very silly and very cheap and goes for a sort of punk rock, heavy metal vibe as filtered through the lens of people who wrote tabletop role-playing games in the 1980s. It is so hardcore that it's got a supplement called Night Moves, presumably after the song by famed punk rock artist Bob Seger. Nightlife is a game that is awkward, but it goes for it, and against the, frankly, pretension of Vampire the Masquerade and so on, it has much to recommend it. Predating both of these, though, is a supplement for the old Chill role-playing game, a supplement called Creature Feature. Again, the cover is a good indicator. You play as the monsters here, which you don't at all in the basic game, and it's played for comedy to at least some degree. But what really makes this iteration of the concept stand out, well, even in Nightlife, you had to maintain your humanity statistic, again, predating Vampire. But here, your monster's goal is to kill some innocent people. Perfect. Thank you. While we're on the topic of the Chill role-playing game, I would be remiss if I didn't address the allegations that I only like this edition because there's another supplement for it that is quote-unquote hosted by Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, who, as you can see here, is my best friend. And let me respond to these allegations in no uncertain terms. Yes. Yes, that's absolutely true. My favorite of the knockoffs of Vampire and so on would be one called Fireborn. It goes a far bit afield of the classic monster thing, more focusing on being similar to those games in being story and character-driven and a game of secret occultism in the modern world. In this case, taking the form of characters being humans who were also reincarnated dragons. This provided magical powers, of course, and also the game had a thing where it would flash back to the ancient ages when your party were all actual dragons, and you would go on adventures then also. Dragon adventures with your dragon friends. I mean, yes, I want to play a dragon, but that's weird. And then, of course, we haven't even touched on science fiction, where the non-human species are very anything goes. TSR's own non-racist early Star Frontiers had insect centaur Vrusk and gliding monkey Yazirians and shape-shifting giant amoeba Drolocytes as core races. The aliens of RPGs are numberless, so please forgive me if I only tell you about one particular favorite of mine. In the game, Battle Lords of the 23rd century. When I say Battle Lords, you say, of the 23rd century, okay? Battle Lords! Of the 23rd century! Okay. Thank you. The, shall we say, mood of this game is pretty clear, and you could play huge, angry, muscular lizard men and stuff like that, but you could also play as the Greys of UFO lore, the small, frail Greys with their giant heads denoting intelligence or maybe even cosmic wisdom, and now with big old guns! Whoopadow! I should add here, though, that I obviously very much enjoy playing the non-human. Of course, many games do not feature this as an option at all, and those are good too. Humans are great. I am very fond of humans. I shop at several human-run businesses. For example, if anyone is running a game of the Cobra expansion of the G.I. Joe RPG, I want in, but only if Globulus is canon. From the old G.I. Joe animated movie. I don't need to play Globulus. I don't even need to meet him. I just need the satisfaction of knowing he's out there somewhere. And now, it is time to move on to this talk's endgame. Of course, as usual, I have left out a great many examples of all genres, and one of these examples that I've left out is your favorite. I have done this not out of want of time, but out of personal spite. However, since this is my show and I do what I like, I will now list every single role-playing game that permits you to play as actual dinosaurs or dinosaur people. Dinosaur people specifically, not just lizard folk who happen to look like dinosaurs, and not any of the games where you can make up your own species, but that don't have pre-made dinosaur species, also none based on non-RPG franchises like Doctor Who or TMNT. These are our parameters. Are you ready? Are you? Then we'll begin. The first of these, so far as I'm able to determine, was Torg, a 1990 RPG about various alternate dimensions invading and occupying parts of Earth, including a lost world dimension and its dinosaur species. It was a wonderful concept for a gaming world, and it suffered a lot from poor execution. The dinosaur people, in particular, downsliding pretty quickly. He's got a guitar. The aforementioned complete book of humanoids for AD&D gave us the Saurials, 4 different species of dinosaur people who all live together in the Forgotten Realms setting, and the also aforementioned Werewolf the Apocalypse gave us the Mokole, who were were-crocodilians with the intermediate form of various were-dinosaurs, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but we're all going to be real cool about it. You understand? Nexus, the Infinite City, is a criminally poorly remembered game about a city made up of cities from constantly shifting alternate dimensions, and it had the Tyrannosaurine Saurian species. Conspiracy X was a not at all an unlicensed X-Files game. No. Why would you even say that? Where the reptoid aliens of real UFO lore were intelligent dinosaurs who fled the Earth 66 million years ago and now want it back! And obviously give it to them. Even if you don't like dinosaurs as much as I do, what are they going to do worse? You could play as velociraptors in the hilariously named Bronchosaurus Rex, set on a planet colonized by humans who were still having the US Civil War, and the game is on the side of the Confederacy. Because, you know, everybody likes dinosaurs, and sometimes I wish they didn't. Dinosaur people in various lost worlds of various kinds can be found in GURPS, the generic universal role-playing game, Cave Master, Space 1889, Chronocalypse for Savage Worlds, Plane Jaya for 5th edition D&D, and even in the Astral Plane in the current edition of Shadowrun. There are dinosaur people available in the post-apocalyptic After the Bomb, when it's its own role-playing game, in the high fantasy Exalted, the space fantasy Starfinder, the caveman comedy Unga Zuga, the confusing horror of Nightbane, the time travel of Time Watch. One Dice Raptors, not pictured, lets you play as an actual Jurassic Park-style raptor, struggling to survive in a world that's not for you and presumably killing all kinds of people for no reason. The Squawk role-playing game is set in a solar system inhabited exclusively by the descendants of earthly prehistoric animals, and it is, of course, delightful. On the other end of the spectrum of role-playing games where everybody plays a dinosaur in space, and by spectrum I mean there are 2 of them, is Cosmosaurs, an unlicensed ripoff of the old 1980s cartoon Dinosaucers, wherein huge dinosaur people from outer space arrived on Earth in ships shaped like themselves, because that's what you do. That's why human spaceships just look like big humans. And then they have conflicts and learn about friendship and all that sort of thing. And now there's an unlicensed game of it, alongside the other Dinosaurs in Space game. To think that we have lived to see such times. But the absolute Nobel Prize winner of dinosaurs as player characters came out just 2 years ago, Dr. Drolin's Dictionary of Dinosaurs for 5th edition D&D and Pathfinder. It's a dinosaur supplement with humanoid dinosaurs to play, and it's written by actual paleontologists and illustrated with actual up-to-date paleo art. It's fully scientifically accurate. It's got tons of dinosaurs you've never heard of. It's got paleontological inside jokes. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I want to be buried with a copy of it, or in a mausoleum made of copies of it. Now, I believe that this is all in the current annals of RPG dinosaur characters, but if there is anything that nerds really love, and I'm not saying that any of you are nerds, but you know, if you see any, if there's one thing that nerds really love, it's pointing out when other nerds have forgotten something. So, I charge you, find some nerds somewhere and have them tell me the dinosaur player characters that I have missed. I've got a meet and greet in the back of the dealer room at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Find those nerds you find, have them come tell me the dinosaur player characters I've missed. I will also be around after the talk briefly, but not for long. Come and tell me how wrong I am. You'll feel good. I will learn something I very much want to. Let us use this power for good at last. But my point with all of this, even the obviously self-indulgent endgame with the dinosaurs, is that the great, glorious expansion and diversification of non-human character options over the years has led to something for everyone. Well, everyone but bigots, and that is, of course, just fine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. God, I love doing CONvergence. We should get out of here because my time is a little bit over. But yeah, I'll meet and greet in the back of the dealer room at 2 o'clock tomorrow, or I'll be out in the lobby briefly just now. Coming up at 8:30 is Miss Shannon's comedy through I don't know what she's calling it, but it's extremely good. I've worked with her a million times. She's brilliant, so stick around for that, and thank you once again.